Welcome to Prime Suspects, a Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl victory lap edition of Prime Suspects for Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr. Alongside Joe and Adam, I'm your host, Matt Landis. Today's topics include a Super Bowl recap through the lens of Prime Sports, as well as the industry as a whole, and the latest development in Major League Baseball's betting dilemma, including its impact on public perception. Guys, kicking off with the latest from inside Prime Sports and a bit of a Super Bowl recap. Joe, we're going to call an audible and lead off with you. Congrats on a dominant Philadelphia victory. How would you describe a personal summary of your Super Bowl viewing experience?
I started feeling good about it sometime around 9 a.m. this morning. I was, for all these years, it's still a white knuckle ride. I don't care what anybody in Philly says. If you're a real Philadelphia fan, you know it ain't over until it's over. And yeah, so everybody who was being nice, reaching out to me during the game, congratulating me like by halftime, I just said, go away, stop jinxing me. I did think it was interesting. I heard from Alan Bolden over in the UK that in the first half when they got up 17-0, Bet365 paid out Philly as the winner of the game, which, hey, way to go, Denise Coates. I like her. She's a classy lady. But again, it was only just, I could read the headline, like Bet365 pays out, then forced to pay out again when KC comes back. So yeah, it was definitely a white knuckle ride. We knew we needed Philly slightly before the game. It was really interesting. I'm sure Adam will talk in more detail about it, what our in-game situation was for all those people who continued to believe in the Chiefs even as they were getting punched literally and figuratively in the face by Philly's defense during the game. So in the end, the only thing I think I texted Adam towards the end, I'm like, I know I'm being a little bit selfish, but could the Eagles stop these garbage time attempts by the Chiefs so that the game doesn't go over? Oh, well, the one blemish. Probably the greatest Eagles game in my lifetime, both because of the result and because of how things played out here for Prime Sports.
Well, I'm glad you were able to enjoy that on multiple levels. And Adam, as Joe teased, go ahead and tell us about the results for Prime and BetCris across Ohio, New Jersey, Arizona, both pregame and in-game.
Yeah, it was a good result in the end. I think books all over the place won this one. I mean, it's often rare to win the Super Bowl. Seems like the players are always on the right side for this one, but this was definitely one for the sports books. New Jersey had a position against Philly, but Ohio had balanced that up a bit. And in the end, it was a slight edge that we needed. Philly, plenty of live action, all Kansas City. Unfortunately, that last touchdown landed on 18, which would have had a significant amount of money at plus 18. So we're trying to hold on for 19 or more. But again, it was a push, not a loss. So it wasn't a complete flip. But yeah, overall, I mean, good volume, good action. I had the ticker up as I was watching it go through, various bet sizes, and a lot of the props fell the right way as well. So it was a good result, good way to finish the football season. Now we have a little bit of a downtime and get ready for March Madness.
And before we fully tie a bow on the football season, I know that we're all bettors to a degree in our own rights as well. We were all on the same segment on the unabated Super Stream. And I will raise my hand as the guy who brought us down, going 0-2, picking Chiefs money line, as well as a Jalen Hurts SGP that saw the anytime touchdown hit early, but under 36.5 rushing yards, not even close. Joe, I loved your handicap on Saquon's first rushing attempt under 3.5 yards. We lost on that one as he went for 4 yards on the first play of the game. But if you would have given me his stat line, I would have lost a whole lot more on that bet. Overall, how was the game for your betting portfolio?
I mean, obviously, I was on Eagles money line, had a lot more faith, definitely was contrarian to the prevailing public and media narrative, which I guess we'll get into at some point here in another segment. But no, I mean, couldn't have been happier with the result. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Adam, you were with Joe on the Eagles when we had the unabated Super Stream appearance. The octopus didn't come through, but all things considered, how was it from a betting perspective for you on Sunday?
Betting perspective was great. I mean, last week here, I said Eagles by more than, 2 touchdowns or more. Easily covered that. So some alternate lines kicked in. A couple that I posted on X on Sunday was the 2-point conversion at plus 330. The rest of the world was plus 240, plus 250. So thankfully that one hit. I did have any player for the Octopus. I got 2 opportunities at the end for that. Unfortunately, Hopkins got the touchdown second last and then caught the 2-pointer on the touchdown afterwards. But yeah, all in all, good results. I did go under 5.5 sacks big. I found a really off price, but at least the sacks were on the right side of the counter. So, you can't win them all. But otherwise, yeah. And then during the game at 7-0, I called it. I said, we're going to run up the score here. And I had plenty of live action running as well. It was all over at 7-0. So, game done.
I'm glad he was that confident because like I said, Sunday night, even after the game was done and they gave him the trophy, I still was edgy and anxious.
Well, from a little bit of nerves as an Eagles fan inside Prime to the industry-wide look at Super Bowl results and our water cooler segment this week, we're going to hit on a few topics per Twitter posts by ESPN's David Purdom. First up, BetMGM saying the Super Bowl was one of the best single game results in company history. Adam, a lot of other operators have similarly commented on the favorable results, including you two with Prime. And with so much of the pregame public handle seemingly on Kansas City, where did the public go wrong handicapping this game? And do you see any actionable lessons that can be taken from this outcome?
No, because they'd gotten it right the previous 16, 17, 18 weeks when Kansas City were dancing through raindrops. So they were all well ahead. Whatever they lost on the Super Bowl, their pockets are still full from all the other wins that they'd managed to get from the previous playoffs to that. So there's nothing wrong that the public did wrong. They just continued on their merry way, betting exactly what they've been betting for the last 3 years, and finally one caught up with them. That's it. That's really the end of it, the bottom line of it all.
That reminds me, at some point during the game, my wife said to me, this makes me believe in karma. So the non-Chiefs backers, non-Chiefs fans, they got one. Joe, when it comes to the outcome, contrary to what a lot of the public was betting, anything to add on your end in terms of potentially actionable lessons to take away?
Again, it's the tyranny of small sample sizes here and the, giving into the romantic narrative threads that, the media and others will create around this. Chiefs and Eagles only had one common opponent this past season. It was the Buccaneers. Philly played them in week 4 and lost. Todd Bowles, if there's a guy out there, you want to beat Jalen Hurts, better have Todd Bowles setting up your defense for you. He just seems to have Hurts' number, and he did in week 4. That was back when Philly was still kind of finding themselves. There was a lot that was discussed about that and the endless pregame coverage. Then they had a bye. Nick Sirianni came out, yelled at the Philly fans, and they went on a 10-game winning streak. The Philly definitely got better as the season went on. You looked at the Chiefs, as Adam said, they were dancing through raindrops. So many close games. That was another narrative. It was supposed to be a narrative about the genius of Patrick Mahomes, what a great quarterback he is, how many one-score games they won. That just means that their competition was a lot closer to the Chiefs. They weren't nearly as dominant. Whereas you saw Philly, particularly their defense, really start to ramp it up towards the second half and the end of the season and really peaked in the playoffs. This game, if you want to talk about what the matchup was, it was not Mahomes versus Hurts. It was Andy Reid versus Vic Fangio, the defensive coordinator for the Eagles. And I like Fangio because he's not one of these like young wonder kid guys who are just barely able to drink legally and shave, and suddenly they're a coordinator in this league. He's an old guy from the Philly area, and, he had all the roads, seen everything. So watching the way he improved this defense with very similar personnel to what they had last year. I mean, the number one defense is not lost in the Super Bowl when it's played in the Super Bowl. And so much like, there's so much betting on the over because people like to see stuff happen. There's an overemphasis, probably at least in attitude and deference given to offenses. That's why, the Chiefs, the public, the Mahomes thing, the whole narrative about three-peat, that's why they went that way. Yeah, I will admit, on a Bible, I am a Philly homer. I was also a defensive player. For me, this was the greatest Super Bowl I ever saw because one defense just absolutely savaged a dynasty on the other side of the field, and they had no answer. The fact that the public didn't get more into it, the media didn't get more into like what Philly was capable of on defense with their personnel and how utterly impotent. I'm still shocked that the Chiefs, when they went into the locker room and Philly was up 24-0, I said, to Mrs. Brennan. I'm like, look, nobody's better coming out of the locker room making adjustments than Andy Reid. And Kansas City came out and they got schwacked by that Philly defense. They had nothing. And so, yeah, I mean, narratives are great. Storylines are great. Offense is great. Defense wins championships.
Well, from a very positive result at MGM, among other books, to the market leader in the space right now, FanDuel reports taking over 16.6 million Super Bowl bets, a 19% increase from last year. Adam, we'll lead off with you for this one as well. Activity peaked at nearly 70,000 bets per minute, according to the book. Based on your experience as an operator, what are your thoughts on seeing these numbers, especially knowing how challenging it can be with technical infrastructure to withstand this scale of activity?
Well, again, you've got to look at this with the way the US is set up. You've got to have a separate instance in every state. So this is spread over, 36, 38 instances. Obviously it's still impressive, but it's not like these 70,000 bets per minute are coming into one instance and one funnel, which we saw, again, when they first opened up, I think first or second Super Bowl, we saw all the sites come down. So they've obviously had a lot of time, over the last 4 or 5 years to get that right. But again, it's spread across multiple instances, which, is kind of brings that down to 2,000 bets per minute going through any single instance, which is well below what I'm sure their capabilities are. Some states obviously higher than others. It's just part of the game. You've got to stay up, especially on Super Bowl Sunday, which many of them learnt the hard way, again, 4, 5, 6 years ago, that it didn't happen like that. So I'm sure they've put in a lot of resources, a lot of money to make sure that they're there and they're capable of doing this. And again, FanDuel isn't FanDuel that everyone grew up with. This is a behemoth of a global company, even versus DraftKings, which is still the DraftKings kind of, which we did grow up with. This is different. FanDuel have done this for many, many years, World Cups all around the world, where again, they've had multiple brands or countries going into single instances where this would have been a much bigger load for them. So they're professionals. They know what they're doing.
Joe, anything to add on this one?
I mean, it's interesting to see the level of activity and whether it's multiple instances or a single instance. It's impressive to see them handle that scale. When you think about it, when you compare it to another event, which they've been doing for, quite a long time, like the World Cup, the activity for the World Cup is significantly higher in volume, especially in game, than what we see with the Super Bowl. So, this is something that they should excel at. The one thing that I do find boring about these numbers is it doesn't give us any kind of experiential depth. It'd be really great if somebody was capturing customer experience with because American games move so fast. The in-game experience can be difficult. I mean, the number of times, we hear it anecdotally about players who you try and get down on the market and then they can't because they're either pinwheeled or, the market changes and things like that. It would be really great if somebody, I hope you guys are listening at Eilers and Krychek, would go a little deeper into the game day experience, into more of like the customer satisfaction, the service aspect, things like that, rather than just like pings and transaction numbers. Those are impressive, but, a deeper, more three-dimensional look at the experience would be really great to see.
All right, well, one final topic in this week's water cooler segment. Joe, we'll stay with you here. GeoComply calculated a 14% year-over-year increase in active player accounts during the game, and it noted the growth rate of active accounts was twice as high on average in states where regulators have taken enforcement action against offshore sportsbooks as it was in states that have not taken similar measures. Does this suggest anything to you about offshore money coming back onshore?
Maybe. The problem is, again, it's such a small sample size. You've only recently, in the last year and a half or so, have had these states sending their cease and desist letter to one operator, being Bovada. Did Bovada really make up that much of a difference in the total addressable market in all of these states to account for that difference? Don't know. We'll have to ask those guys the next time they publish their numbers, which will be never, right? So, you'd have to think that logically, if one operator is not available, other operators will be taking their action. You also look at the amount, the offers. That's the thing. Like, looking at the offers that were available going into the Super Bowl, they were just utterly ridiculous. So obviously, It'll be interesting to see how much of that activity was brand new activity versus, legacy activity. But beyond that, it's too early to say, too small a sample size to even really venture a firm guess.
Adam, you've been our champion on this show when it comes to regulating the unregulated, to borrow a favorite phrase of yours. Through that lens, how do you view this topic?
This has been happening from day one. There's 100% money coming in the onshore that used to be in the offshore. It's just a given. Whether it's more this year than other years, no, I think just the whole industry's growing. Again, the states did it to one, but then in the backyard, you've got now all these sweepstakes and a whole grey market within their own backyard as well. So I wouldn't take too much into this. This is where it's naturally gone. This has been the natural progression. And I can guarantee that there is significant money, especially in the smaller amount, the smaller bettors. No one's going to go through those efforts of trying to play offshore when they can just get on at a FanDuel, DraftKings, down the road, easy depositing of that nature. So again, numbers, data, you can sort of turn them into whatever you want to. I wouldn't take too much into this. It's just the natural growth of the industry as well. And the Super Bowl. I mean, it's the one that grabs the attention every year. And I think the offerings today versus, what Joe says, versus what used to be offered. I mean, even we had over 500 props, which I think was the most that we've sort of ever done for BetCris in Latin America, etc., before having Prime and that. So I mean, we just saw in New Jersey, which is first Super Bowl for Prime in New Jersey, the ticket just rolled. So, there's bets that weren't there 12 months ago.
Well, turning the page from football to baseball and moving on to our look ahead segment. Last week, Major League Baseball saw its third gambling scandal in less than a year with the firing of umpire Pat Hoberg. And this comes the same week the former interpreter and personal aide to Shohei Ohtani was sentenced to 57 months in federal prison for committing bank fraud and filing a false tax return. Straight to the points, Steve Ruddock has called this Major League Baseball's betting dilemma, in which he notes MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred recently commented that he believes a federal wagering framework could help to reduce instances like this, echoing similar sentiment from NCAA President Charlie Baker, as well as NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. Joe, we'll kick it off with you here. What are your thoughts on the cumulative damage done from these specific incidents and whether or not they've irreparably harmed the integrity of the game from a public perspective, or could possibly just be blips on the radar?
Blips on the radar. And I don't mean to say that as being dismissive. Obviously, we take it seriously. It's one of the reasons why we said that sports betting ought to be regulated here in the United States, have a visible market to make sure that the integrity of the games were protected at the same time that, you opened up this market. But what this is really, it's great for us insiders to look at and to debate about. But for the broader public spent far more time debating, was the NFL in the tank for KC with their rest because they wanted to see them three-peat and all that. Again, this is the whole notion about the threats to the integrity of the game and who the threat is existed well before sports betting was ever legalized here in the United States. And right now, people see, if you go by the stuff that the public talks about, not just betting Twitter, but the stuff that the broader public talks about, they see that it's the leagues, the long held belief that the leagues have scripts, that they know the winners ahead of time and things like that. I mean, it dogged Daniel Stern for ages. There's a great article in Bloomberg magazine this week talking about that stuff. You had Roger Goodell had to spend like 5 or more minutes at Media Day trying to explain how the NFL really wasn't biased towards Kansas City. So things like this, catching up. I mean, if a poker player wants to share if a poker player asks you to do anything with them in sports betting, watch out. It's like Greeks bearing gifts. Okay. I love you poker players, but you look at that, you look at the Jonte Porter reference. Jonte Porter is got hung up in part by a professional poker player. It's good that these people are being caught up and screened out. In the end, it seems like Hoberg was really guilty of incredibly bad visuals with no real evidence of any kind of influence on the game. He just acted stupidly and he's gotten punished. But beyond that, there's no similar, not even close outcry about him as there is with is the NFL trying to script Patrick Mahomes into being the GOAT? Oh, and one other thing regarding this. Oh, let's all make it federal. We all saw what happened in that hearing at the end of the last Congress in December that was there to talk about like the SAFE Act and responsible gaming and everything like that. And it got immediately detoured where Charlie Baker went from, enunciating the position about protecting athletes and everything like that to he just got sidecarred into a debate with 3 Republican senators on trans athletes in the NCAA. Once something goes up on the Hill in Washington, D.C., it's crazy town. So anybody who thinks that's the answer, let's go federal. One, they're not listening to this new administration, which is talking about deregulating all over the place, right? So they're swimming against the current on that one. Once it gets up on the Hill, you think Governor DeWine arbitrarily saying like, hey, let's double Ohio's tax rate on sports books is bad. Just imagine how the federal government and all of its projects will come down like a ton of bricks from a taxation and fee-seeking monster on something like sports betting. All right. And will become a font of social engineering for all sides. And this is something we shouldn't go anywhere near it. I know why the leagues and the NCAA want it. It's because it gets them back in the driver's seat on negotiating contracts and getting more value out of sports betting than what they're currently doing in this fragmented state-by-state market and with so many different operators. That's really why they want it. But the federal oversight is no solution here.
Adam, picking up where Joe left off, what do you make of this latest news out of Major League Baseball and whether or not it provides any meaningful ammunition to those lobbying for a federal betting framework?
No, I'm agreeing with Joe here. This is a blip. I mean, if only they truly understood the things that have happened the past 30, 40 years in these sports versus the things that are happening now and all the information that's coming out. The whole point of regulating, I believe, the major part was to bring back the integrity of a lot of these sports. Tennis has done a huge job over the last 20 years. And now the US sports are just getting into it. They're understanding all the data that's collected and the ability to see, line movements and all these other things. And then being able to go into the depths of the way the money comes in, the KYC, the processing, like everybody in the space, in the regulated space, is keeping their eye out for these things. It never existed before. It was quite easy to do any of these things before. And in the lesser regulated places of the world, these things still happen. But blip on the radar, small things, great little catches. They want to blow it up and make it big news, whatnot. But these are just part and parcel of collecting some of the crap as they go along and building these into more transparent, visible aspects to their sports and things like that. If they had been doing this 20 years ago, boy, the stuff they would have found. But everybody is aware that now there's a lot more eyes on it. Everybody's aware. The players are slowly learning again, some of them, whether they have biases that they can't get out of or friends. And, it's obviously more of a conversation around them than it is before. They're starting to learn how to present themselves or discuss these things in public or between friends and stuff like that. It's just part and parcel of, this is 6 years old, like coming into the 7th year. It's a baby. So just let it grow. There'll be more. I guarantee there'll be more, but treat them for what they are. It's just an evolution of cleaning it up, understanding the process and educating the players, the refs, the commissioners, the public, all those kind of things. But, we're all headline chasers these days and they're wanting to throw it up and target something to go make changes that are benefit to them. And it's benefit to them only. Federal versus state, again, that's Joe's domain, definitely not mine. It's a nothing burger.
Seems like Couchy's slowly federalizing it anyway. Right.
Well, that'll leave us plenty to look ahead to over the course of the NFL offseason. And on that note, we will go ahead and wrap things up for this week. To the audience, whatever plans you may have for the NFL offseason as Joe gets ready for the Phillies and the upcoming baseball season, we will continue to be here every week, bringing you informed and unfiltered takes on the biggest topics in sports betting. Thanks as always for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week right back here on Prime Suspects. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at Prime Sportsbook, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.